Hello, welcome to another BankBeat conversation with Tom Bengtson. I'm publisher of BankBeat magazine, and my guest today is Roy Terwilliger. Roy is a longtime friend and a very accomplished person in three distinct areas. One, he's a successful banker, or has been a bank owner, and he's also been active in the association world, been active with the American Bankers Association, and currently he's the Member Services Director of the Minnesota Bankers Association. And then he's also been active in politics, was a state senator in Minnesota here through the 1990s. And we're going to talk about some of these things, just reflect back on some of the things that have happened during your lengthy career. So welcome.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Appreciate you being here. I hope I got all that right.
Well, yes, you did. It's been a great career.
Good,
and,
good.
And most of it, of course, around banking, and I can really honestly say, it was a profession that I really had not intended on going into, but once I did, I saw the good parts of banking, being able to help the community, help businesses, help individuals. And so we really had a career that I kind of fell into that I truly enjoyed.
That's wonderful. Well, let's start out by just looking at one of the banking related things. So as we look back, you were involved in the startup of a bank, Suburban National Bank, opened in 1976, long time ago. And of course, the environment, the economy, much different than it was today. But you shepherded that organization in Eden Prairie, which is where we're making this recording today. And it grew through a very difficult time, those late 70s, early 80s. That's when the interest rates were going way up, crazy. You had to be a banker through all of that. What do you remember about that, and what can we learn about that time?
I remember the biggest thing was as the prime was going up and down, and as people were trying to adjust to those rates. We had a usury statute in Minnesota, which also complicated it for a lot of people. And so from that standpoint, it was a time that small businesses really were fighting the battle of high interest rates, and also the economy was such not nearly like it is now. I mean, where the interest rates are now, or where the Dow Jones is, and the stock market and everything is far different, and so small businesses struggled. But it was a fun time to be there, to be able to think you could be involved with people, and they were this community was just growing,
right?
And so it was only 5,000 people when we started Suburban National Bank, and now it's 65,000. And so it was a time when you really felt like a banker was really important. They still are, obviously, but it was really helpful to a lot of people.
Of course, but so as bankers, you interact with bankers now, and they talk about interest rates going really, the Fed funds rate going from 0 to 5.5 in a relatively short amount of time, and dealing with that stress. Do you sympathize with that, or you go, that was nothing?
No, I sympathize with it because it's all relative.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was a great time.
Yeah. Okay. And then the bank sold the bank to U.S. Bank in 1989. 1990. Okay, sure. And so the issues in the industry were a little bit different then than they are today. A lot more sort of geographic issues about boundaries in terms of where banks could locate and where they could operate. Not quite so much important today as it was back then.
Well, we were pretty restricted on what the branching laws were, and we ended up starting Suburban National Bank, and then within 2 years, because it's a full township, the distances were such they weren't very convenient for people. So we had two what they called detached facilities. They weren't branches, they were called detached facilities. And you were just supposed to take deposits and cash checks and such. We really were supposed to do the lending at the main office. And so it was a different time. Now, of course, you've got interstate banking, and people are, I don't know how many charters or branches rather there are now in Eden Prairie, but probably 30.
A lot.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
That's far different than what it was, of course, back in the old days.
Sure, sure, sure. And then you, of course, were very civically active. You were involved with, I think you started the Eden Prairie Rotary Club, or were involved with folks who did. And
Last charter member alive yet.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, but all these organizations that are so important, the Eden Prairie Community Foundation, and I know other groups. Has that changed? In other words, where it's essential for a banker to be involved in these community groups, or is that as important today as it always was, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's even more important today. Unfortunately, I think in those days, of course, there were fewer people, but unfortunately, as times have changed and we've gone into multiple offices here and there, people are busier. Bankers are busier in their day-to-day operation. And so there's not so much of community involvement. But in those days, for example, in Eden Prairie, I mean, we started a community foundation, we started the Rotary Club, we started the Crime Prevention Fund. You know, you could have the Chamber of Commerce meet and it would be around a big table. And now you go and it fills the room.
Yeah.
And so population growth, business growth is all there. But I think banker involvement in community is just still extremely important.
And you have kind of what I think is an interesting perspective from the sense that you grew up in a very small town in South Dakota. So you have this experience of being in a small town rural environment, and then you come to a major metro area like the Twin Cities. To me, it seems like those differences would be dramatic. Maybe they're less dramatic today, I don't know, but reflect on that a little bit, and what that was like.
The town I grew up in until I was 10 was 100, I counted it up the other day, 128 people lived there. I could remember them all. One church, 128 people, my dad's gas station, you know, one hardware store, one grocery store. In my first grade class, there were 4 grades in the room, and I was related to about half the first 4 grades. Then contrast that, later I went to work for the South Dakota Bankers Association, and then from 65 to 68, and then the ABA in New York at that time, from 68 to 74. So I moved, during that progression, early years of my lifetime, I moved from 128 population to New York City, and lived and worked in a building that had more people than the whole town.
Isn't that something?
So it's been fun being a part of all that. Fun being a part of banking through all that. It's been really interesting.
So you were introduced pretty early to the association world. Not only on the state level, but I know you were with the South Dakota State Chamber, and then that led to the South Dakota Bankers Association job, and then you mentioned the work with the American Bankers Association. So just tell me a little bit about what's it like working on the associations. Of course, that's what your role is now with the Minnesota Bankers Association, but it's not very many people who have worked in both in their career. Usually you're either a banker or you're an association professional. I think having a leg in both worlds is a little bit unique.
Well, very checkered past here. You know, it has been, it was really useful. It was useful for me when we came and decided to, when I worked in the association world, which was about 8 or 9 years, I got to know a lot of bankers, and it was in every state in the country, and so I saw all kinds of banks, from the Chase Manhattans down to the small community banks. Then moving here and to start a bank, and I wanted to quit traveling because we had a small family and young family, and so we wanted to not have to be gone all the time. And so when you go through that change, it was really a good preparation, really, for me, I thought, in dealing with the bank, because I had seen all sizes of banks and had had the opportunity to know people from the biggest to the smallest banks, and truly have the feeling, and which I still feel very strongly, that banking, if you had a tragedy or an emergency in a small town or any town, and you needed to get the community leaders together, the 5 people you'd call, one of those 5 would probably be one of the leading bankers in town. And I think the banking industry has a vital role to play in every size community, whether it be the big ones, the large corporations, or the smallest of towns. I think banking is vital, and of course it's changed considerably since those early days. I mean, you know, with technology and everything else. But it's still very much a people business, and still very, very important that the banker be involved, and that people, and I think people rely on banking to be around the table and to give them their advice and give hopefully a broader picture of what's been going on.
Mm-hmm. And after you had some experience in a bank, running a bank, you had this experience working in the association world, but then you had this opportunity to be involved in politics. State senator in the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota legislature from 92 to 2002. Tell me a little bit about that period in your life, and also a little bit about the transition into that. What motivated you? Did you always want to get in politics, or how did that come about?
Well, I had a long time interest because of my dad. My dad was county young Republican chair in South Dakota where I lived. When I was 10 years old, I remember going to the county courthouse and staying up all night with my dad watching election returns come in. That was back in the day when they wrote them with chalk on a blackboard. And the U.S. Senator was from my hometown. I mowed his mother's yard. I was his page at the 1960 Republican Convention in Chicago. So I had this long-time interest, and when I was at the ABA, I actually did an exploratory trip back to South Dakota. When that senator retired, I went back to do a exploratory campaign to go back and maybe run for office then. It was pretty formidable to even think about at that time, so the campaign didn't last long, but I did do that. And then when we got here, we moved to Minnesota in '74, and then the bank opened in '76. I was treasurer of some political campaigns. And then when it came up that the guy was treasurer for the state senator, was appointed chair of the PUC, then I ran for his seat. And so while I was in the banking world, I was also in the state senate for those years you talked about. During that time, I got to be involved in the fundraising side and such of politics, and ended up ran for 6 months. I was in the race in 1976 to try and run for the state U.S. Senate seat. And then I pulled back from that and ran for governor after I got reelected to the state senate. Actually, it was 97 when I got in the race, and I was in for about a year. So I traveled every county in the state. I don't know how many talks I gave, but I did count up once 52 service club speeches, so they got awfully tired of hearing me.
Yeah.
But it was a real feeling in my part that bankers were involved in their communities, and banking had a perspective that should be represented maybe statewide.
Sure.
And so I did that. It was a great experience, but I also withdrew right before the convention because it was fairly obvious that I wasn't going to get the nomination, and so I uncomplicated things and
Sure.
withdrew.
But you did the work, and obviously it's a lot of work. And I remember actually that campaign in 98 or 97 for the election in fall of 98 for Minnesota governor. Of course, that was the one that Jesse Ventura won. Isn't that
Yes,
right? Yeah,
that's
so,
right.
I mean, so the whole state that's kind of a memorable time. But I actually remember you going on the group meetings or the district meetings with the MBA and doing kind of a stump speech early in the campaign at that time. And that was kind of unique.
It was probably, some people would say, questionable whether I should be politicizing it in front of one industry. But I did rely upon bankers a lot. When I go into a town, go see them. I knew most of them, and go in and talk to them, and a lot of them would introduce me to other community leaders in the town. And so I got to know the state really well.
Sure. And when you were in the state legislature, did you feel like you were accomplishing things? I mean, today the politics is so divisive, and people, you know, if you're on opposite sides of the aisle, it seems like there's not much collaboration, very little communication. Was it different back then? I kind of hope so.
It was quite different. Starting off with the DFL had a heavy majority in both houses, And there was one session we couldn't even do anything. If we tried to, if the governor vetoed it, we couldn't do anything but watch you get get run over by the majority party. But it was it was different in that if something came up, you needed to talk about something, you'd sit down and talk about it, and find a way. I mean, politics is not 100% one way or the other. It's a matter of compromising, getting people to come together and work together. So some of the legislation that got passed, they would rely heavily upon that type of collaboration. There were times when, and most bills in the legislature are not divisive. Most of them, it's 67 to 0 or whatever it might be in the Senate. But when you get into an issue that's kind of divisive, at that time there was a lot of collaboration in committees, and you can say in behind not closed doors, but back in the retiring room where people go back and sit down and work out their differences and try and find language that would be such that it would compromise, you'd be able to compromise an issue and get it done. And that doesn't appear to be the case right now. And I think the public is longing to get back to a time of less divisiveness. Right now, unfortunately, we seem to be going through a period where there's a lot of argument. And, one of the things that also started to go on so long here, Tom, but one of the things, you never spoke ill of another person. And that's not the case today. And you did not, if you were running and having a debate or a conversation publicly, you didn't say things that were really kind of distasteful. The things your mother would have told you, you can't do that anymore, you got to behave.
Right.
There's no, that's changed.
Yeah, it certainly has. Let's, if a promising young person, let's say in college, came to you and was looking for career advice, and they were interested in all three areas where you have been active, being, civic life and politics, association work, and in banking and finance, what advice might you give them?
I'd encourage them to do it, because we need people. We really sincerely and deeply need people who are have the public interest at heart and that are interested in working together to accomplish that public interest goals. And I would really encourage them. We need really good, bright people in the not only the legislative process, but in government in general, because there are so many issues, and issues are getting more and more complex. The whole need for are changing back to the more of the compromising times has never been greater, in my opinion. And I would hope that if someone came and asked me that, I would encourage them to do it and do it with sincere interest of we're looking out for the public interest, the public role, and not for any selfish reason whatsoever. And I'd like to think that it's going to change back. I'm optimistic it's going to.
You're a hopeful person.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Good for you. Hey, let me just ask you real quickly to talk a little bit about what you do now. You work for the Minnesota Bankers Association. You're responsible for member development or member outreach. Or clarify that title.
Basically, what I do is I go out and call on banks for the industry and go out and see what's on their mind, what's going on that maybe is not being talked about as much as it should be. Tell me how it really is. Tell me how you're looking at it here in Main Street or whatever the town might be. And that has been very interesting and enlightening for me. Then I come back and try and, if there's a question that comes up, I try and write up a report and talk to the powers that be within the association about what people are saying, what's going on, how they're doing. Yeah. And it's been very interesting.
I'll bet. What in general, what kinds of things are you hearing from bankers about their current challenges, let's say the last 6 months or so?
Well, I think right now a lot of the discussion is just the things I'm talking about, civility and that type of thing. As far as the industry is concerned, there's a concern on the part of most all the bankers I talk to about regulatory overreach, if you want to call it that, where you have agency, one, I won't mention one particular agency, but basically what they really don't have the authority in the minds of bankers to do what they're trying to do. And so this is why there's some lawsuits that are emanating out of this. And I think all of these bankers associations that are dealing with that right now, trying to get governmental understanding and legislative understanding that, you know, they don't have authority to do some of the things they're talking about. And banking can do things very well without interference from regulatory bodies. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's on the minds, at least of the people I talk to.
Sure. Okay. Roy, you did a very interesting thing that I really admire, and that is you made the effort to write down your family history, your personal experiences in a book. And it's a book that I've seen. We've got copies of it around our office here. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that. I think it's very important to preserve our stories, and you actually went to the trouble of doing that. And for one, I want to applaud you, and I want to just ask you how you decided to do that, a little bit about how you got it done, and why you did it.
Well, thanks, Tom. You know, it's not on the bestseller list. You can't buy it in the bookstore. We did it for our family and for our grandkids and our great-grandkids, hopefully someday. Excuse me. And we did it because we knew very little about our past generations and our families, my wife's and mine. And we thought it would be good for them to have a history, a little bit of what went on in their family over the years and who was who and all that sort of thing. And so we felt it really vital just to preserve that for our family. You know, probably need to update it a little bit because there have been grandkids added and such since then. But at the same time, you know, I would encourage people to do it. It was really a really enjoyable experience, and Jackie Hilgert helped us, assisted us along the way. And we didn't print a lot of them up. We just basically enough for a family, and we thought it was really worth our time and effort, and we enjoyed it.
Well, that's great. And of course, Jackie is an excellent writer. She's a good friend and colleague of mine, and so you had a great partner on that project. And you know, whether you need to engage a professional writer or maybe a writing coach, or maybe you don't, but whatever, I think it's worth it to take the time to actually put those stories down in writing, thinking about future generations, because I do think there will be an interest in it. Genealogy is so popular right now. We see these family trees, and that's very interesting, but all you're seeing is a name. You know, wouldn't it be interesting, you know, to know just a little bit about some of those names? And I think if you take the time to put it down in a book, you give future generations that opportunity. And I think that's a really good thing. So thank you and congratulations for doing that.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for being with us. My guest today has been Roy Terwilliger with the Minnesota Bankers Association. Again, my name is Tom Bengtson, publisher of BankBeat magazine and Bank News magazine. This has been another BankBeat Conversation.